There was a time in my life when I started noticing something that didn't make sense. People were trying, working hard, making plans, doing everything they believed was right, but somehow they stayed stuck. Not completely, just enough to feel like something was always blocking the next step. I remember watching this pattern repeat over and over again. Someone would get close to a breakthrough, a new opportunity, a financial shift, a relationship moving forward, and then suddenly something would interrupt it. A delay, a distraction, a decision that didn't make sense. At the time, I didn't question it, because in the world I was part of, we had an explanation for everything. We didn't call them mistakes, we called them attacks, hidden influences, unseen interference, things that were believed to affect a person's direction without them realizing it. And the more I observed, the more convincing it became, because it wasn't just one person, it was many. Different lives, different situations, but the same pattern. Progress, then interruption, momentum, then confusion. And once you start seeing that repeatedly, it creates a belief that something is working against you. That belief is powerful because it changes how you interpret everything. A missed opportunity is no longer just a missed opportunity. It becomes something intentional. A delay is no longer normal. It becomes something targeted. And once your thinking shifts in that direction, everything starts to feel connected. I remember when I fully accepted that idea. It felt like I finally understood what was happening, like I had an explanation for why things weren't moving forward. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this belief was shaping how I saw everything, and that belief itself was part of the problem. The first pattern I started to notice was not obvious at all. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't feel serious. In fact, it looked normal. Distraction. I remember seeing people with clear goals, clear direction, even real opportunities in front of them. But somehow, their attention would shift at the wrong moment. Right when something important needed focus, something else would pull them away. A new idea, a random problem, something urgent that suddenly felt more important than what they were originally doing, and they would follow it. At the time, I thought this was external, something influencing their direction. But later, I saw it clearly. Distraction doesn't need anything external. It only needs your attention. Because once your focus is broken, your momentum breaks with it. I remember experiencing this myself. I would start something with clarity, a plan, a step forward, something that could actually move my life ahead. And then suddenly, my attention would shift. Not forcefully, subtly. I would start thinking about something else, something that felt important in the moment, but had nothing to do with my direction. And by the time I returned, the energy was gone, the focus was gone, the moment had passed. That's how powerful distraction is. It doesn't stop you completely, it just delays you enough times that progress becomes inconsistent. And inconsistency is what keeps people stuck. At the time, I thought this was an attack. But what I understand now is this: distraction works because we follow it. We give it importance. We allow it to take our attention. And once your attention moves, your direction follows. That's the first hidden block. Not something controlling you, but something pulling your focus just enough to keep you from moving forward consistently. And until you recognize it, you don't even realize how much it's costing you. The second pattern was more subtle, but far more powerful. Doubt. Not loud, not obvious, just a quiet voice that appears at the wrong time. I remember seeing people take a step forward, a real step, an opportunity, a decision, something that could actually move their life ahead. And then suddenly, they would hesitate, not because something changed externally, but because something changed internally. Questions would start to appear. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? And those questions didn't just stay as thoughts, they slowed everything down. I experienced this myself more times than I can count. I would be clear one moment, confident, focused, ready to move. And then out of nowhere, that certainty would disappear, replaced by hesitation. That's what doubt does. It doesn't stop you directly, it makes you stop yourself. You begin to overthink. You delay decisions. You wait for the perfect moment that never really comes. And while you're waiting, opportunities move on. At the time, I thought this was something being placed in my mind, something external creating resistance. But later, I saw it differently. Doubt is not an attack from outside, it's a reaction inside. It appears when you step into something uncertain, because growth always includes risk. And your mind tries to protect you from that risk by slowing you down. But that protection can become a problem, because if you listen to doubt every time it appears, you never move far enough to see what's possible. That's how it blocks progress, not by force, but by hesitation. And once hesitation becomes a pattern, it creates a cycle. You think, you delay, you miss the moment, then you repeat. That's the second hidden block. Not something controlling your path, but something influencing your decisions just enough to keep you from moving forward. The third pattern was stronger than distraction and heavier than doubt. Fear. But not just any fear. Fear of failure. This one doesn't show up quietly. It feels real. I remember seeing people get close to doing something important, starting something new, taking a risk, making a decision that could actually change their situation. And right at that moment, they would stop, not because they didn't want to move forward, but because they imagined what could go wrong. What if I lose everything? What if this backfires? What if I make the wrong choice? And those thoughts felt so real that they didn't need proof. The possibility alone was enough to stop action. I experienced this myself in a very clear way. There were moments where I had real opportunities in front of me, clear steps I could take. But instead of focusing on what could go right, my mind focused on what could go wrong. And the more I thought about it, the more intense it felt. My body would tense up, my thoughts would speed up, everything would feel uncertain. And in that state, the easiest decision was to do nothing. That's how fear works. It convinces you that staying where you are is safer than moving forward. Even if staying where you are is what's keeping you stuck. At the time, I believed this fear was something external, something being placed in my path to stop me. But later, I understood something important. Fear of failure is not an external force. It's a natural response to risk. Because every meaningful step forward includes uncertainty. And your mind tries to protect you by imagining the worst outcome. But that protection becomes a limitation when it stops you from acting. Because if you avoid every risk, you also avoid every opportunity. That's how this attack works, not by forcing you backward, but by keeping you still. And when you stay still long enough, the fourth pattern was one I didn't recognize for a long time because it felt like I was doing the right thing. Overthinking. At first, it looks like awareness, like you're being careful, responsible, making sure you don't make mistakes. But over time, I realized something. Too much thinking can stop action completely. I remember moments where I had a clear decision in front of me, a simple next step, nothing complicated. But instead of acting, I started analyzing every possibility, every outcome, every risk. I would go back and forth in my mind, trying to make the perfect decision. And the more I thought, the more confused I became. Clarity disappeared, confidence dropped, action stopped. That's what overthinking does. It creates the illusion of control. You feel like if you think long enough, you'll remove all uncertainty. But that never happens because life doesn't work that way. There will always be unknowns. And if you wait until everything feels certain, you'll be waiting forever. At the time, I believed this was something external, like confusion being placed in my path to block me. But later, I saw it clearly. Overthinking is self-created. It happens when you try to control outcomes that cannot be fully controlled. And the result is paralysis. You don't move forward. You don't move backward. You just stay stuck in thought. And while you're stuck thinking, time keeps moving. Opportunities pass. Momentum fades. And nothing changes. That's how this attack works. Not by stopping you directly, but by keeping you busy in your own mind. So busy that you never take the step that actually matters. The fifth pattern was one of the most frustrating to watch, and the hardest to recognize in myself. Inconsistency. Because unlike distraction or fear, this one doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens over time. I remember seeing people start strong, full of energy, full of focus, ready to change their situation. They would take action, make progress, begin to move forward. And for a while, things would work. But then something would shift, not dramatically, just enough. They would slow down, skip a step, lose focus for a few days. And those small breaks would turn into longer gaps. Before they realized it, they were back where they started. I experienced this myself more times than I want to admit. I would build momentum, see progress, feel like things were finally changing. And then, without any clear reason, I would stop, not completely, just enough to break the rhythm. And once that rhythm was broken, it became harder to restart. That's the key. Progress is not just about action, it's about consistent action. Because consistency builds momentum, and momentum makes everything easier. But when consistency breaks, momentum disappears. And without momentum, even small steps feel difficult. At the time, I believed something external was interrupting progress, something that allowed movement for a while and then stopped it. But later, I understood something much simpler. Inconsistency is not an external force, it's a pattern of behavior. It happens when focus is not maintained, when priorities shift, when discipline fades. And those small breaks add up. They don't look significant in the moment. But over time, they create a cycle of starting and stopping. And that cycle keeps you stuck. That's how this attack works. Not by blocking your path completely, but by breaking your momentum just enough. So you never reach your full progress. The final pattern was the deepest one, because it didn't just affect actions, it affected how people saw themselves. Negative identity. I didn't understand this at first. I was focused on what people were doing, their decisions, their actions, their results. But over time, I started noticing something underneath all of that, the way they described themselves. I'm not lucky. I always struggle. Things never work out for me. At first, those sounded like simple statements, but they weren't. They were beliefs. And those beliefs shaped everything that came after. I remember realizing this in my own life. There were thoughts I repeated without even noticing. Quiet assumptions about what I could or couldn't achieve. And those assumptions affected my decisions. If you believe something won't work out, you don't fully commit. If you believe you always struggle, you expect difficulty, even when things are going well. And that expectation changes how you act. You hesitate, you hold back, you prepare for failure instead of success. And those actions create results that match the belief. That's the cycle. Belief. Gay action, result, reinforced belief. At the time, I thought this was the strongest attack of all. something deeply rooted that controlled everything from the inside. But later, I saw it differently. It wasn't something placed in me, it was something I had accepted over time, formed through experiences, repeated thoughts, and reinforced patterns. And once it's accepted, it feels like truth, not just a thought, but reality. That's what makes it powerful. Because if you believe something about yourself strongly enough, you don't question it. You live according to it. And that's how it blocks progress. Not by stopping you externally, but by shaping how you move internally. And once your identity is limited, your results follow that limit. After seeing all 6 of these patterns clearly, something changed in me, not suddenly, but deeply, because I had to face a truth I didn't expect. These were not external attacks, they were internal patterns. That realization was uncomfortable at first, because it meant I had to stop looking outside for the reason things weren't working and start looking at how I was thinking, how I was acting, and how I was responding. And once I did that, everything became clearer. Distraction wasn't something pulling me away. It was me allowing my focus to shift. Doubt wasn't something being placed in my mind. It was my reaction to uncertainty. Fear of failure wasn't an attack. It was my response to risk. Overthinking wasn't confusion from outside. It was me trying to control what I couldn't control. Inconsistency wasn't something interrupting me. It was my lack of sustained discipline. And negative identity was not something forced on me. It was something I had accepted over time. That changed everything. Because as long as I believed these things were external, I felt powerless. I felt like something was working against me. But the moment I saw them as internal patterns, I realized something powerful. If they are internal, they can be changed. That's the shift. You move from feeling controlled to becoming aware, and awareness gives you choice. You can notice distraction and bring your focus back. You can feel doubt and still move forward. You can experience fear and take action anyway. You can interrupt overthinking. You can rebuild consistency. You can redefine how you see yourself. That's real control. Not over everything that happens, but over how you respond to it. And once you understand that, these attacks lose their power completely because they are no longer hidden. They are visible, and anything you can see clearly, you can change. Progress disappears.